Friends, welcome. Today we celebrate the life of Rob Reid. Many of you who knew him for more than 20 years think of him as Bob. So today we will share the stories, the talent, and the extraordinary gift of Bob Rob. I'm Liz Carlin Metz. I'm on the faculty here at Knox and the artistic director of Vitalis Theater in Chicago, the genesis of a wonderfully creative and wholly irreverent artistic relationship with Rob and Lori and my husband, Robin Metz. Let's begin. Our first collection of memories is a collage of impressions, remembrances, and idiosyncrasies. Karen Cates, a dear friend who lives in Montana and is an executive coach, writes, "Compared to many of the other people I've met through Rob and Lori Reid, I'm a relative newcomer to their friendship. As I suspected happened for many, I met Lori first, whose sunniness shone through her curls one afternoon across a lobby at Knox College at a Galesburg civic art event. Soon, however, she was joined by a white-bearded man. It has always been white for me. A little grimmer in his countenance, but rippingly funny. This was Rob, Lori's husband. I remember laughing during our first meeting. Little did I know just how much that man and I would laugh over the precious years I knew him. Now bear with me while I share my experience of our early friendship, Lori and me. Well, actually, always Lori, Rob, and me. Did they ever do anything separately? Was I to be doomed to a superficial friendship with Lori because her husband came with her as a package deal? In the past, I would sigh. Close female friends are hard to come by in our adult years. The husband always seems to come with the wife, but not always with endearing results. Of course, sometimes the husbands are simply wonderful. I learned quickly that knowing Rob and Lori as they would become, was a new and edifying experience in friendship. I won't be trite and suggest that the two of them made this incredible whole out of two halves. They are two very whole people in my mind. But combined, light sparks flew off of Lori, who indeed brightened Rob's shadow side, illuminating a completely absorbing friendship that worked well in its entirety. Rob's darker, and his at times 14-year-old male sense of humor, bloomed wildly under Lori's adoring light. I came to love them both, separate, combined, and any other way they chose to share their friendship. It would be later, when we deepened our mutual knowing of each other during their visits to my home in Montana, that I would come to envy and appreciate the closeness Rob and Lori shared. It was also during these visits that Rob and I struck our own satisfying chord, all of us sharing our wisdom, hopes, and dreams made for edifying and sometimes profound moments. So as not to lose grasp of the links among us, Rob and I, and sometimes Lori, started an almost daily correspondence. When I reflect on my dear friend Rob, I'll remember him best as a guest in my home. I'll recall his exultation over being in the mountains, our hikes and expeditions into the Beartooths and the Gallatins. I remember his enormous container at the breakfast table filled with his special blend of commercial cereals. His pictures, his music, his sardonic grin, and his worship of my dear friend, Lori. While I miss Rob's white beard, his way of sidling up to one side to make a sarcastic comment about the moment, his impassioned description of and scandal over the latest social injustice, while I miss all these things, the thing I miss most is his daily cartoon, or word of the day, or merely ironic observation. An early riser, Rob would take to his email and send out laugh bombs, making mornings fun, a gift of a grin or a groan every day. The cartoons weren't the point. It was the special moment where I felt that I was getting the best of Rob, if only till Lori woke up. A rich gift, indeed. Kathleen O'Donnell Brown, a friend of Lori's since 7th grade and part of Rob's world at the Dick Blick for several years, says, I remember coming back to work at Blix after 4 weeks of maternity leave. Rob encouraged me to sell the baby before he loses value. If only I'd listened. And who can forget when Rob and Lori started to eat healthily? The weekly donut day at Blix turned into Death Biscuit Day, a phrase still used at our house. Steve Fouts, a client and friend, recalls, "If you are of a liberal mindset, talking to Rob is like preaching to the choir." I will never forget my visits to Rob and Lori's house, where my request for their creative services always turned into deep conversations about justice and the world. I remember forgetting why I came to visit, but would always leave energized and more clear about who I was and my purpose in the world. Bob Marsden, a longtime friend who signed up Rob online to be a minister along with him in the Universal Life Church. The greatest gift Rob gave me was his friendship, and I cherished it. In Rob, I found a kindred spirit, someone who enjoyed humor in all its forms, someone whose politics precisely matched mine, someone who cared about people. He was my best friend. I know many others lay claim to Rob as their best friend, and they're right. Rob's heart, mind, and spirit were big enough to share with so many friends. Rob was calm, steady. He was a Buddhist. I remember telling him one day how angry and frustrated I was with a particular situation at work and how it was negatively affecting my life. Rob patiently listened to my rant and allowed me to vent. Then, with a slight knowing smile on his face, he said, "Hey, Rev, chill. It really isn't worth the stress." And when we talked the situation through, I realized he was right. And to this day, when I start to stress out, I can hear his voice and see that smile, and I say, "Hey, Rev, chill." Another friend, Jan King. When our son, Seth, was around 6 years old, he had a favorite game about the solar system. At the time, he was moving into his very own room and wanted the image from his favorite board game on the wall there. Rob Reed was a great artist, but it was never beneath him to create something to delight a small child. So he painted the solar system on Seth's bedroom wall. The wall was a gift from Rob that gave Seth his own creative space to paint, read, write, create, design, and dream mischief. Sound familiar? Mike Voiles, a co-worker at Dick Blick, longtime friend and groomsman in Rob and Lori's wedding. For nearly 40 years, Rob and I were good friends. We worked together, socialized together, talked politics, sports, music, and philosophy. I wasn't prepared for him to be gone. I've tried to recall one special story that would epitomize our friendship, but time has blended them into a lifetime friendship that happened in the blink of an eye. Rob was the type of person that other people want to be like, myself included. Rob's wit, his intellect, his artistic talent, and his balanced reasoning, no matter how difficult the circumstance, they made me truly admire and aspire to be like him. He has left his own indelible stamp upon each of us. I intend to cherish mine until we meet again. Rob Peterson, Rob's boss at Dick Blick, recalls, "I think of myself as Cupid, of sorts, in the Rob and Lori story. As advertising manager for Dick Blick Company, I hired Lori fresh out of her first year of college as a summer temp, and subsequently for every summer during the rest of her college career. Earlier in the mid-'70s, I was involved in bringing Rob into the fold at Dick Blick, where he quickly became a force in the advertising department. I was never afraid to hire people who were smarter and more talented than I am. Rob Reed was a prime example. I can recall him often sauntering into my office with that characteristically laid-back approach to tell me about an idea he'd had. Over the years, I participated in many of his inside jokes and exchanging of favorite cartoons, even to the point of my continuing to send them to his house after I retired. But my favorite memory remains playing the role of Cupid. Chris Takalasa, a local artist and friend. I can't help but quickly be reminded of all that I gained from having him as a friend, the memories and visions of Rob and Lori. It was almost like one word. Rob and Lori together are so strong and never to be forgotten, always encouraged, always encouragement and inspiration, always an entertaining conversation, full of wit and his own delightful brand of cynicism and insight. He always seemed to nail a thought or idea with almost poetic justice. Rob's encouragement, coming from an accomplished artist as himself, made it even more important to me. I looked to Rob to see how a real artist operated. He left an example of how to make the life of an artist become a reality. There really is no loss of Rob, because there was so much that we gained from him. He lived an amazing and fulfilling life that is admired by all who knew him. His soul and spirit lives on in our lives because he was always a part of shaping who we are as artists and friends. Tommy West, a local physician, client of Reed Studios and friend, contributed the following. It is an impossible task, privilege, to try to say something about Rob that would encompass his impact on others. In a moment of clarity, I turned to the ultra-traditional hardbound version of a dictionary. Consider the following. Enrich, riched, riching, riches. 1, to make rich or richer. 2, to make fuller, more meaningful, or more rewarding, as in, an appreciation of art will enrich your life. 3, to add fertilizer to. 4, to add nutrients to, as in, the dairy enriched its milk with vitamin D. 5, to add to the beauty or character of, to adorn, as in, glittering tears enriched her eyes. 6, physics, to increase the amount of one or more radioisotopes. 7, a feeling of self-fulfillment, appreciation within one's inner self. It was so simply expressed and contained within our own dictionary. Rob simply enriched all the people that came into contact with him. With his passing, we all must nurture and sustain that feeling of self-fulfillment, appreciation within one's inner self. Rob Reed. I'd like now to introduce Ralph Scott, who will read a collage of remembrances that was compiled by former co-workers at Dick Blick, Karen Noble, Corrine Nelson, Julie Davis, Becky Hale, Amy Johns, and Ralph Scott.
Rob told me this day was coming, that I would need glasses someday. And I think that was when I made fun of him for wearing a pair of glasses, reading glasses that he needed at the time. And he said, "Your time's coming." That was about 25 years ago. Rob was Bob when I first met him, and I worked in the warehouse at Dick Blick. And that was a part-time job. But one night going through the advertising department for whatever reason, I noticed all of the equipment and the art boards and everything that we worked with and thought, my day job, actually, I need to restart that. My day job was working at a print shop. So I had a lot of experience doing the same types of things that we did at Dick Blick. And that night, when I looked through all the equipment that was there, no one at the boards or anything, I thought, I wonder if I could work in here. So one day, I got the nerve to go in and talk to Rob and asked him if there was anything I could do to help in the art department. And I explained what I knew how to do through the experience that I had at the print shop. And at that time, I then figured out that he was doing all of the darkroom work, all of the photography, and as well as his other duties there. And he said, yeah, I could really use some help here. So he talked with Roger Peterson, and it came to pass that I was able to start working in the evenings. And then finally I decided I wanted to either work there or just stop working 2 jobs. And he said, no, let's get you on full-time here. So he did that. And I'm going to be ever grateful for that, because I learned so much working with him and being a part of that team. It was just amazing to be there. I'm going to read now what we all came up with over lunch one day after Rob passed. And most of these words are from Karen Noble. And she's always good at turning a phrase. Rob came to Dick Blick to fill the photographer's position. As a former art teacher, he never stopped teaching, really. He taught himself to shoot, develop film, enlarge photos, and halftone them for catalog printing. He researched and purchased our first digital camera and taught himself to use it. As our manager, he spearheaded the transition to digital design and taught himself and all of us how to use a Mac. It was important for him to keep up with technology, and we were proud to say that whenever Apple introduced a new model, we got it, thanks to Rob. We got a kick out of his low-tech inventions as well, such as a vacuum cleaner hose that stretched between his office and the photo studio. Fortunately, the speaking tube never took off like email did. And that's a true story. The tube went from Rob's desk to my desk, which actually in reality was only about 15 feet away. And there was a door that was almost always closed between us. But I was 2 feet away from the door, and I could have always just got up, opened the door, and said whatever I wanted to say. But it was fun to do that anyway. I'll bet Roger Peterson doesn't know that existed. Okay, he was easy to work with and comfortable to be around. Though his huge intellect could be intimidating, he didn't use it to make us feel small. However, he did use his obsession with health and fitness to inflict guilt on us for bringing Sweetos and Danner's sweet rolls to work. To this day, we can't eat a donut without shame. Rob eventually became vice president, but titles didn't matter to him. He was just one of the gang. Rob was a bit goofy and seemed to enjoy pranks we pulled on him, especially on April Fool's Day. One such prank involved us leaving the premises one by one to run an errand or rescue a coworker whose car had broken down or due to some other mishap, until eventually his entire team was absent. He would usually remain calm about everything, and only once did he scold us. He said our excessive chattiness embarrassed him on a day when the board of directors was doing a walkthrough. We were so shocked. He always had a way of making you smile and laugh, and we took it as a huge compliment when we could make him laugh in return. For his 50th birthday, we went down to the Salvation Army and bought him all kinds of junk, like a polyester shirt and a tie with a stain on it. And a little statue said, "World's Greatest Dad," but we crossed off Dad and wrote Boss. We borrowed the walker that was there for people to use if they needed it. Rob really needed it. Ralph photoshopped Bob Ross's hair on Bob's face, and we framed it for his desk. He especially cherished that. Having a penchant for preciseness, Rob would chisel through a rough stone into something that looked like a machine. One of his Blick catalog covers was of his alabaster sculpture photographed in stages of progress. Another one was of the Running Man logo depicted as a marble sculpture on a stone pillar. Only it was completed creating his computer and took about a week to render. Computer graphics had opened up a whole new frontier for him, and he considered it to be a monumental feat. We didn't have the heart to tell him. It was one of the most unattractive covers we'd ever had. He had the rule that we couldn't use the word unique in our product descriptions because if everything was unique, then nothing would be. Although we still can't bring ourselves to mouth the word, it does seem to be the appropriate term to describe Rob. He would be appalled, but everyone would know, who knew him would certainly agree. We were very sad when he left Blick. We lost a great friend. After that, we had the pleasure of working with him on occasional freelance jobs and seeing him and Lori at various art and music events. It was always good to talk with him, especially about his latest artwork. And that was from Karen Noble, Corrine Nelson, Julie Davis, Becky Hale, Amy Johns, and me. And I do know that there's another member of the team that was a big part of the team, and that is Louise Buckman, and she's here today. Rob and I had a friendship that lasted at least 25 years, and it just seemed like it was a blink, as Mike said. And after he left Blick, he then became Rob. I didn't even know that he had been called Rob much until after that day. And he sort of left Bob behind at Dick Blick and became Rob. And I think he really was a Rob, not a Bob. His whole life was spent doing artwork and doing the things he enjoyed. And I'll always be grateful to everything that he helped me do. Thank you.
Rob loved to tell stories, and Rule Owen will share one or two of them. Rule is a dentist in Galesburg and friend of the Reeds for many years.
Greetings to all. When I think about Rob, three characteristics out of many come to mind to describe him. First was his love, second, his ingenuity, and third, perseverance. Rob loved many things. Foremost was Lori, his family, their dogs, music, art, computers, and humor. Rob had a huge creative side. He loved to figure things out. He used those skills in his art, computers, graphic design, and making things. His humor gave a whimsical bent to some of his projects. He was able to create and appreciate many unusual things. I chose perseverance because when Rob set his mind to do something, it got done. Love, ingenuity, perseverance. I want to share one of my favorite Rob stories, a story of love, ingenuity, and perseverance. Whenever we got together, we just clicked. Whether it was music or art or humor, Rob and Lori became great friends. One evening, he related a story to me of when he and Lori lived on Willow Lane. Cedar Fork was in their backyard. They had some land on the other side of the creek. Rob thought it would be nice to have an auxiliary patio out there, but the creek was in the way. Rob thought, what I need is a bridge. He went to the library and researched building a bridge, but all he could find were books about small garden-type bridges and large, expansive bridges. Not to be discouraged, he told Lori, all I need is 2 telephone poles. They would reach across the creek and I could make a bridge. Sometime in the near future, heavy rains, about 5 inches worth in a short period of time, a few hours. Rob and Lori's basement became a flood zone. As Rob was working to remove the water in the basement, and Lori was surveying the damage in the backyard, unbeknownst to Rob, Illinois Power had been replacing telephone poles in the area. Aha! Floods? Uninstalled telephone poles? Lori ran to the basement and said, honey, those poles have arrived. Can I have the first slide, please? The rest is history, as Rob figured out a way to move one of the poles in his yard and the other from a neighbor's yard that just happened to float in. He asked the neighbor not to bother to call the power company, as he would take care of the foreboding poles. Have you ever tried to move a telephone pole by yourself? Can I have slide 2 and 3, please? After he got the poles in position, he dug deep footings for concrete, mixed thousands of pounds of concrete in a wheelbarrow, then embedded the chains into the concrete to wrap around the poles. Place wooden planks and side rails, as seen in these next 3 pictures. This story is a perfect example of love, ingenuity, and perseverance. I would like to end my time with a haiku. The man was my friend. I will miss his wit and laugh. He is missed by all.
Next, we'll hear from Mike Godsell. Mike is an instructor in art here at Knox College. He employed the Reeds for many years as designer of the J&J Dog Supplies print materials, and then had the role reversed when he was working on his second bachelor's degree from Knox and had Rob as an instructor in a ceramics class.
I've known Rob and Lori for so many years, I don't really know how many. And I think it started out with that professional relationship, but over the years it grew into one of great respect for both of their art capabilities. Today I want to share a little story with you. I had the privilege, Rob taught ceramics here at Knox for 1 year to help us out while we were doing a national search for a tenure track replacement. And Rob and Lori taught graphic design here for, I believe, 3 years. And I was fortunate enough to be a student in the 100 level ceramics class that Rob taught. Rob was a calm, patient, understanding teacher, and I thoroughly enjoyed being a student in his class. In one of the earliest class meetings, Rob made sure we understood that the process of creating ceramics is a somewhat unpredictable one, with several steps along the way where fate can intervene and crack a ceramic piece or shatter it completely. He wanted to be sure that we were emotionally prepared for that potential disappointment, so we could accept it as simply being the price of creating works in clay. In what I now see in retrospect as a perfect expression of Rob's calm Buddhist mindset, he cautioned us against allowing ourselves to get too emotionally attached to any single piece we made until after it had successfully survived the final glaze firing. He urged us to have a detached mindset that would allow us to accept philosophically any disaster that might befall a piece of our work, by reminding us that at any point prior to surviving that final glaze firing, we should have the attitude that the piece was, quote, just a clump of mud and thus of no great value, end quote. As fate would have it, a few weeks later during class, while I was putting the final pole on a large bowl on an electric wheel, Rob walked over to have a look at my work. Just as I took my hands off the bowl and looked up at Rob in hopes of seeing an expression of approval on the master's face, his foot accidentally stepped on the end of the foot pedal that controls the speed of the wheel. That caused the wheel to immediately accelerate from a dead stop to several hundred revolutions per minute, and in the span of only a second, flattened my just finished bowl into a wide, flat plate with torn, wavy edges. Rob immediately turned bright red, and he had a look of grave concern on his face as he quietly apologized to me for carelessly causing such a disaster. The students working near me looked up to see how this unfortunate situation was going to play out between us. I looked at the flattened destruction on my wheel, then I looked up at Rob, shrugged my shoulders, smiled at him, and said, "It's no big deal. A wise teacher told me a few weeks ago that until a piece safely survives the final glaze firing, it's just a clump of mud." So fortunately, I wasn't emotionally attached to it anyway. To prove it, I quickly gathered the clay on my wheel into a ball of mud and said, "See?" To which we both chuckled and smiled. I wish now that I'd been wise enough to have kept that ragged-edged plate and glaze fired it as a keepsake. For looking back now with the wisdom and clarity of hindsight, I see how that moment with Rob taught me a life lesson about how we each can choose how we react emotionally to disappointments in life. And many times, if we pause and look clearly, the disappointment at hand may be no more important than just a clump of mud in the broader scope and context of our entire life. I believe that Rob the Buddhist would be pleased to know that out of that disappointing moment, I learned something far more valuable than just how to successfully throw a pot on a wheel. Rob was that kind of teacher in class and in life.
Marilyn Ponzer Morris, a retired school administrator, has been a friend for 38 years. She'll read her memories of Rob and those of her two children.
It is said that to be human is to be in relationships, and I recall Rob as being in relationships. In relationship as a parent, Rob allowed Amy and John the independence they needed to thrive. He loved them deeply and always shared their achievements and their talents. In relationship as a spouse, Rob's affection for and devotion to Lori were demonstrated through behaviors such as warm looks and soft touches. Also, the delivery of a coffee and a biscotti to begin their day together. In relationship with those in need, Rob was a support to those in need, including traveling to St. Louis to support his friend Richard through his end-of-life experience. In relation with his friends, Rob was an interesting and engaging friend. He loved sharing his quirky sense of humor and the ideas generated by his bright mind and extensive reading. In relationship with art, Rob was a creative and diversified artist who wanted to share his work with others. I think of him every time I pass a piece of his artwork that's in my home, which includes stone and metal sculptures, graphic art, and pottery. One winter, Rob and Lori visited me at South Padre Island, Texas, and I recall Rob selecting very healthy food from a menu that included impossibly delicious deep-fried shrimp. While walking the beach, I recall Rob investigating all of the interesting items brought in by the tide. And I recall Rob's comments about light and sound and the water of the Gulf. I also recall Rob rising early each morning and running at water's edge. Rob took good care of himself, just as he took good care of his relationships with others. Rob telephoned me before he and Lori departed for Cleveland, and I will always be grateful for that phone call. Rob was and will forever be my friend. And I share my daughter's submission. My daughter, Deidre, is a surgeon living in Wisconsin. It's funny, my remembrance of Rob is not a particular time or place. It's bigger than that. and it's mostly in the context of my dad. For starters, I do have to call him Bob because that's who he was as I was growing up. And I remember him from church, always there every Sunday. I remember him and Dad at the annual pig roast, which was held out back of the church. And looking back, I suspect they had a few as they cooked the pig overnight, for they usually looked a little grim the next morning. You might think unshaven, and you might think, oh yes, wearing their awesome 1970s t-shirts and cut-off jeans. I remember that Bob and his first wife, Colleen, were so important to Mom and Dad that they were asked to be my brother JR's godparents. I remember him with Dad, who wore flippers and rainbow suspenders, probably to the horror of Lori's parents, when Rob and Lori got married. I remember him and Dad and the big purple Holy Roller church bus that we used for our youth group trips. I think they had to spend a lot of time under the hood of that one. Which takes me to my next memory, the garage. He and Dad were always under the hood of something in someone's garage. They shared a love of all things motorcycle and car, especially if it was a foreign job. There is a great picture of Dad in Bob's garage, standing where the engine should be in the Jaguar. When Bob finally decided to get rid of the TR6, it was a challenge for me not to buy it, to keep it in the family. In my basement, there's a beautiful pencil drawing memorializing Dad's BSA motorcycle that Bob drew for him. Motorized vehicles were a huge part of their bond. Mostly I remember Bob as a man who laughed. As a kid, I vividly remember that he could tell stories that would make everyone laugh until they cried. As I got older, I appreciated his dry humor in a more sophisticated way, but still laughed until my sides hurt. I remember being really impressed as a kid with the pictures and other art that he made, and that appreciation only grew as I got older. I am blessed to have several Rob Reeds hanging on my walls and sitting on my shelves, each with a personal tie from him to me and my family. And I remember that it was he and Lori who came for us. Who came for us as my dad died. In my memories and in reality, he was one of the best friends that my dad had. And I always picture Dad sitting at the end of a dock, looking out at the water. And I picture that Bob has joined him there, and they're laughing. And my son, JR, godson to Rob, is a chief warrant officer in the state of New York. I was in a desert, surrounded by hate. And I remembered Rob. I had a funny story that I wanted to tell. And I thought of Rob. I was young, and I was admiring a car that was tucked into a garage, a car that would never run again, and I thought of Rob. Here was a man who loved me. I remember working together on some artwork with him, and it brought laughter. There's artwork in our home which we display with pride, and it bears his name. So many of the things that I thought of as Rob were the best things that we could all hope to be. So he is not gone from us. He is in all of us whom he touched. Yet we miss his love, his humor, his wit, his talent, and his humanity.
Humor was a large feature in Rob and Lori's life together. Here are two visual examples. In 2009, Rob and Lori and their friend Karen Cates went to the Art Center's fall costume party as spin-offs of the SNL character of Dieter, the German expressionist who hosted the talk show Sprockets. The following month, on a whim, the Reeds decided to send Karen a video birthday greeting as their German characters from the party. They sat down at the computer, turned on the camera, and this was the unrehearsed birthday greeting they sent Karen that morning. As always, these things run perfectly in the rehearsal.
Good morning, Karen. We are here to wish you a very, very happy birthday. If you do not choose to partake in joy and frivolity today, punishments will have to occur, and we don't want to do that. Do we, Eva?
No, Klaus.
My name is Ernst, not Klaus. Who is this Klaus you keep speaking of?
Apologies.
Let's get back to the matter at hand. Happy birthday, Karen.
Happy birthday.
I had text you. In 2011, the Reeds took a road trip, stopping in Colorado, Utah, Idaho, and Montana. Mercedes Klein, one of the former graphic design students from Knox College, arranged to meet them for lunch in Pocatello, Idaho. After taking a few photos, Rob set up the camera on timer to take a shot of the three of them, and then realized it was taking a series of photos. Mercedes said, "Let's go with it." So they laughed and made this series of photos. Laura Pratt-Sashheim was a book club buddy of Lori's for a number of years and became friends with the Reeds. Laura now lives in California and wrote to Lori, "Yours is such a true, gold standard kind of love. I'm glad you have such good support all around you, Lori. Nobody's love may compare to Rob's in sheer quality, but hopefully the sum of it all will help ease your pain as it ebbs and flows. 33 years of being loved so truly means that you are steeped in him and will carry him with you. Rob's spirit was so gentle, funny, and kind. You are one of the few couples I've had as examples of real, true love, soulmates, united forever." Pat Caldwell, vice president at F&M Bank and friend of the Reeds for over 20 years, will read thoughts from Rob and Lori's daughter, Amy.
just a little change of plans. I'm actually going to attempt to read Lori's first, and then I'll read Amy's. Lori's story. Lori met Rob when she was 19 and took a summer job at Dick Blick Company in their graphic design department, where Rob was the advertising manager. She continued to work there every summer while in college. It was in the summer before her 5th and final year of college that Rob told her he was getting a divorce. The first thought she had was, I'm going to marry this man someday. The second thought was to wonder where the first thought had even come from. Until that moment, he'd been an off-limits married man, but upon hearing the news, her subconscious evidently felt it was time to let her in on what it knew. It seemed to be fate, and they were married in September the following year and had 32.5 years of an incredible marriage. The longer they were together, the deeper their relationship grew. When Rob quit his job as vice president of advertising at Dick Blick in 1996 and began working at home with Lori in her graphic design business, they became virtually inseparable. One friend said that he thought of them as one word, Rob and Lori Reed. Their love and respect for each other shone about them in an aura of peace and contentment. Their days were filled with working in their business together, creating art, enjoying their backyard sanctuary, and their shelties. Another friend described them as being steeped in each other. Over the years, they frequently took road trips to the western states, where they enjoyed hiking in the mountains, visiting friends, and going to art galleries and museums. For their 20th wedding anniversary, they spent 3.5 weeks in France, traveling in a big circle through the country and having a stunning experience. Rob and Lori talked of how blessed they were, that they frequently fell in love all over again, of how they often found each other to be the most interesting person to talk to at a party, of being one person in two bodies. This past fall, Rob said to Lori, if people really knew just how amazing our relationship is, they would stone us. So Rob-like, right? A week after Rob died, Lori found a letter he had left her in the event he didn't make it through the surgery. It was a combination of Rob's humor, a love letter, and advice. In it, he said, you can take the words I write here about you, squeeze out the love and admiration in the form of a potion, multiply it times 1,000,000, and you'll have made a few drops of the ocean of feeling I've had for you since we met. He wrote that he wanted Lori to go forward and do what made her happy and not to be afraid to love again. He also wrote, look for a cardinal or squirrel in the springtime that is exhibiting odd behavior. That'll be me. At least I hope I can pull that off. Then I'll be gone to wherever it is that I have to go to wait for you. The words Rob wrote give Lori solace and guidance as she navigates the world without her soulmate's physical presence. Rob's daughter Amy writes, anyone who knew my dad will be familiar with his myriad wonderful qualities, not the least of which are his brilliance, artistic talent, humor, and encouraging support of nature. They may also have experienced a few of his darker, more prickly moments, or his propensity to say things like, that is going to be a shipbird right out of the box, or I see you are wearing all of your makeup today. As my brother mentioned in his obituary, he was not one to sugarcoat things. That's how you knew his praise was genuine and heartfelt. He often pulled me out of a slump by saying things like, at least you don't live in a yurt. And true happiness comes from accomplishment, words I still turn to when I'm foundering. Getting the thumbs up from my dad on any aspect of life was the ultimate reassurance to me that I was heading down the right path. So much of who I am is a direct result of the person he was and knowledge and views imparted from him. We shared a similar worldview, but also a strong mental connection. I can't even count the times I would be thinking of him and he would call me or vice versa. It's almost unbearable to think that we'll never share another conversation, glass of wine, cup of very dark coffee, or a meal not containing our mushrooms again. When I propose eating shellfish or lamb, who will make gagging or bagging sounds? I can only focus on all the wonderful meals, talks, and time spent together, and I do feel incredibly fortunate to have had those. Things I remember fondly are the time he made an ice rink in the backyard because I was interested in figure skating. All the summer days we had spent swimming together at Lake Lawn when I was a little girl. eating German pancakes, potato pancakes, and blueberry blintzes on the weekends. John and I would visit him and Lori. And the cool things he made for me over the years, like a microwave Halloween costume and a modern architecturally fabulous Smurf house constructed from foam core. I'll always be grateful to Dad and Lori for sending me to France with my French teacher, Mr. Nussbaum, and other French students. It was one of the highlights of my young life. Through my childhood and adulthood, I knew that if I got into a situation I couldn't manage, I could turn to Dad. I don't recall him ever missing a school event, band concert, or ceremony. He brought so much to the world and to everyone who had good fortune to know him. Most daughters probably think their dad is the most special, but mine really was the most unique and special father I know. I was and so very proud and lucky to call him my dad, and I hope he felt proud and lucky to have me as his daughter.
Robin Metz is director of the program in creative writing here at Knox College and executive producer of Vitalist Theater of Chicago. He is also friend and co-conspirator with Rob.
Rob was my friend for nearly 30 years, and in the last 2 decades, we became active collaborators on numerous projects. I have acquaintances and colleagues in many countries around the world, indeed across 3 oceans, but there has rarely been a man I admired more or loved more fiercely than Rob. He was a champion of progressive ideas and social justice who rarely expressed anger, except at times when confronting some foolishness in the body politic. But even then, his impulse was to satirize it rather than condemn it. And he always embraced the people around him, regardless of their views. As an artist, Rob believed in the sublime, I suspect. He believed in the essential harmony he might glimpse and release from wood or metal or paint or stone. God's truth made manifest in artist acts of piety and absolute humility. Add to that his steadfast love of Lori Reed. They were a couple who inspired other couples to renew and nurture love. This was their gift to us. One gift amongst an abundance of virtues. Rob Reed was not a tall man, nor a brawny man, but he was nonetheless a giant. His loss diminishes me. His loss diminishes Galesburg and a wide swath of the world. This is part of a collaborative project that Rob and I worked on together for a play that Vitalist Theater produced in Chicago called Mother Courage. One of the things we did was to find a bunch of junk and create a sort of fearsome female image, each image containing pictures of a family and wicked money, which is the thrust of that play by Bertolt Brecht. I should also add that for this show and many Vitalist shows in Chicago, Rob and Lori designed all of our visuals and posters and newspaper ads. It was just an endless stream of creative ideas. For this particular show, Rob had developed, I don't know if we have that image, Rob had developed a wonderful poster that we approved, and it started to appear all over Chicago, and we started hearing from audiences that they didn't think it quite captured the passion of the play. So we came back and we said, well, let's do another poster. And he said, well, you already have this poster up. You can't just do another poster. But he did another poster. And then as it ended up, he did a third poster. And we put them all up. And then, of course, we were all savvy about marketing and branding and that sort of thing. So when we started to run newspaper ads in the Tribune and in the Reader and Sun-Times, the idea was you would have the same image every week so that people would become familiar with it and go to the play just to escape the tedium of seeing the same image all the time. But we decided on a new tactic, and using these and another dozen or so images that we created and Rob photographed and manipulated text, we started running a different image every week for every play. I have to tell you, it was the talk of the town. Nobody had ever considered to go in the opposite direction from branding and just confuse the audience every week with a new image. And Rob was so tickled pink that he had not only created this wonderful array of images, but that he had flown in the face of all marketing wisdom. It was the greatest campaign, advertising campaign that our theater had up until that point benefited from. I'm going to read you a poem I wrote for Rob that appears in this journal called International Poetry Festival of 2011. I'll tell you a little bit about how it came about. This festival was held in Dylan Thomas's hometown in Wales called Swansea. Some years before, I had worked to establish a link between Galesburg and Swansea, Wales, and indeed, we now are sister cities linked by the Galesburg poets, Carl Sandburg and Dorothea Tanning on one hand, and the Swansea poet, Dylan Thomas, on the other. So I was very pleased to be invited to attend this festival and asked to contribute to this journal. And I knew a poet in Wales who had grown up by a rock quarry, which was indeed called the Seventh Quarry. And subsequently, he worked in that quarry and ultimately became a poet. So I guess that tells you it must have been easier to be a poet. But in any event, I was thinking about rock and stone, and I was struck by all the stories that Rob had told me, how he would go out to the Rockies and other places like the artisans of antiquity to find particular stones and have them sent back, and to envision in the raw stone the sculpted image that it might become. So, since Rob and I had worked together, melding language and images, I wrote this poem for him called Writing in Stone, and it begins with an epigraph from D.H. Lawrence. Here the stone leapt up from the plain earth, in the meeting, the clasp, the close embrace. First is the lay of the land, call this the story, the through line, the cornice of sorrows that windrow like snowbanks in pastured desire. Second is voice. The rock might be quarried or tumbled by glaciers, but must bear the heft and the pock of the place, the feldspar or granite, limestone or shale. Story is given, the pelt of terrain. Voice is extracted from caverns, exuded in babble of dreams, through a scree of remorse, or polished like sundogs in quartz. Nothing is random, but structure is borrowed like pattern of lichen from air. The dry stones arise in a wall, in a henge or a cairn. The poem is a dolmen, awaiting the onslaught of frost.
John Riker, professor of philosophy at Colorado College, and his wife, Marcia, professor of classics, were introduced to Rob and Lori by a former Knox faculty member, Jonathan Lee, due to their love of Shetland sheepdogs.
That's wonderful. Rob and Lori, Marcia and myself do have this insane, overwhelming passion for Shelties. And when we got together, there was typically 8 of them roaming around. So in our several concluding talks this afternoon, if you could kind of conjure up those Shelties and put them on the stage in your imagination, the great Dowager Countess Sidney, the loner Connor, the life of the party Tucker, the dazzling Dazzle, and Buddy Holly, good old Buddy. I'm a philosopher, so was Rob. We loved talking ideas together, and Rob was just so intelligent and so thoughtful. It was a joy to see and talk with him. When it came time to say something about Rob on his parting this world, Lori asked if we could say something, give a funny story or something like that about Rob. And I thought about funny stories, and I was stumped. I couldn't think of any. And so I did what a good philosopher does. I inquired into why I was stumped. And here is my answer. We like to remember funny stories about people who leave us in order to denormalize them, to make them stand out in some way. But Rob was never properly normalized. He was never simply an everyday-ish kind of guy, and thus never needed to be denormalized. In fact, he spent his life denormalizing everything else. I delighted at Rob's fresh perceptions. He was always there, wherever the there was, seeing with his own eyes rather than everyone else's. He was original in the deepest meaning of that term, an origin, a source, a spring of life. Why, he could even make dead stones come to life, fill them with spirit and laughter, grief, stateliness, and always this wondrous sense of chaotic order that roamed around his glorious mind. If Rob had a defect, it was that his inner Sheltie warm, fuzzy, bouncy, barky, often did not fully come out, although it was more than adequately expressed in the wondrous actual Shelties which have inhabited his and Laurie's world. The Sheltie that always did come out was Rob's playfulness in his sculptures, his ever so dry wit, his startling juxtapositions, his attitude toward life. Serious playfulness, playful seriousness. Damn, I love that man, and I miss him horribly.
Before I start, I just want to thank everybody here. This has been one of the most beautiful services I've ever been to. And thank you. Rob is with us all today in a way that he wouldn't have been if this service and celebration hadn't been. So thank you, Laurie, and thank you, everyone. As a classicist, I just want to say that one of my favorite quotations or understandings from the ancient world is from Pausanias, who always talked about stone, bronze, as breathing, and said, it is the form that is already there within the stone that the sculptor brings out. As I recall the terrible shock of Rob's passing, I find myself still stuck in a dulling grief that makes it hard for me even to try to express the inexpressible value of his living. We saw Rob and Laurie often when we came to Chicago from Colorado Springs and back again. They would be standing outside the door with gentle smiles as we drove up with our 4 Shelties. I was always nervous that their hyper-Sheltie mania would overpower Rob and Laurie's well-trained little beauties, and tried to keep our dogs on leash. Rob would assure me that they would figure it out by themselves and that everything was fine. They would then, the Shelties that is, dive into the house, and after a hurly-burly of barking, all 8 of them in the earlier days would then careen out into the beautiful back patio and garden that Rob so nurtured and loved, race around together, and of course, poop. When Rob, minutes later, would come out calmly with his pooper scooper and pick up after them, I would stand and watch in some wonder. It was such a simple act, but something about the way he did it, his willing acceptance to engage the ordinary tasks of living, brought me into a space of devotion that I have rarely, if ever, experienced. Once, after breakfast, when I was about to put down my cereal bowl for the dogs to lick, I asked him if that would be all right. He said, "Why not? We have soap and water." That was Rob. He was so generous, always there to help, to answer even an unspoken need or question. He reached into a part of my psyche that just came alive and made everything all right with the world when I was with them both. His incredible sculptures, of which we have 3, grace our households in Chicago and Colorado Springs. And maybe that's the word, grace. Rob was always so okay with it when John and I saw things in our metaphorical way in his sculptures that he didn't, and he would play with our imaginings. One of his mandala sculptures seemed to me to have a dog in its design. He quite readily acknowledged it and said, "But look, there's another. It's Dachshund." And the name of the sculpture was changed to Soul of a Dog. I guess our souls met in dogs, and I always remembered when I was with Rob, trite as it seems, that dog is God, spelled backwards. When John and I went to visit Lori when she was in the virginity of her grief, she read us a letter Rob had written her in case he didn't return, in which he advised her that she might find him as a cardinal, doing odd things in the back garden. When John and I were about to leave, I turned to look back once more at that garden and saw a cardinal hopping up and down on the bird feeder. Strange behavior, and as I focused more deeply, a mourning dove came and perched right next to the cardinal. There is much more in this world than we are willing to know or to open our eyes to. But I do know that Rob is watching over Lori, and that she is capable of visions, those in love with each other in the way that Rob and Lori were, are always capable of that. If that's all we can have, then let us embrace it. Watch out for cardinals. I am so deeply filled with the presence of so many of you here today who loved Rob as we did, and do, and always will.
We'll close today with a writing by friend Mitch McClure, who sent Lori these musings on the transformation of living life where renewal is inevitable, but nothing is ever lost. It can be hard with couples who are close to think of one without the other. We have seen orange for so long. We may be startled to see yellow or red out painting the town on their own, and realize that perhaps it's just a change of light, not yellow or red, but rather another orange in a different hue. In response to Mitch, Lori concluded, "In so many ways, I'm still orange. I am Rob and Lori Reed when people see me and interact with me and still speak of Rob in the present tense. But my hue is shifting at different times in new circumstances, and I'll start to be more of my solo color. I think in this analogy I'd be red and Rob was yellow, since I was the more social and outgoing personality in our mix. I'll start to be more orange. Orange will always be seen in the right light, but the red will learn to shine too."
Thank you.